So the first thing we're going to talk about is what materials you'll need, and you'll need any kind of embroidery or cross-stitching floss, at least 2 bundles, scissors, some kind of credit card or ID card, and beads. And let's get started. So you're going to take your embroidery floss or cross-stitch floss, and you're going to measure out a length of it. And if you're using one color, you don't have to do this, but I like to use 2 colors. And then you're going to tie it off, or fold it in half if you're just using 1 strand. Go ahead and trim that up and set that aside for now. So you're going to take what color you want for your main tassel, take your credit card, and line up the edge and hold that down tight. And what you're going to do is you're going to wrap the thread around the credit card, and you're going to do this firmly but not so tight that you can't move it later. And you're just going to keep wrapping and wrapping until it's about as thick as you want. I usually use a whole bundle of cross-stitching floss before I think I'm done, because I like my tassel nice and thick. Try and shimmy that bundle off the card. And you should have a big thing of loops. Now what you're going to do is you're going to take the strand that you sectioned off earlier, and if you're using a tied part, make sure that knot is right in the center so you'll have even amounts of both colors. And what you're going to do is you're going to tie that in a knot right on that cornered edge. And tie that nice and tight. And I double knot mine just because then I don't have to worry about it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to cut those loops. So now we are starting to form more of a tassel. I always hold the strings while I pull, that way I make sure I get it nice and even. Just make sure all those loops are cut. Now, if you want, you can go ahead and trim up those edges now. If not, don't worry about it. You can do that at the end. Just make sure they're all even. So now we have the beginnings of what's starting to look like a nice tassel. Now what you're going to do next is we're going to make that kind of, that little, I don't know what to call it, the little bloop at the top of the tassel. And we're going to do that by tying nice and tight another little section of yarn or thread. Try to make that top nice and smooth and pull that really tight. Go ahead and double knot it for now, as tight as you can. And then you're going to flip the tassel over and do a half knot on the first side, and then flip it over again and then do another half knot. And you're just going to keep this up, so flipping it back and forth, doing a half knot each time until you're happy with how thick that binding off is. Then when you're done, you're going to double knot it and go ahead and clip those off. Should look something like this at this point. So now we're going to thread a bead on. Doesn't have to be perfect. And this can be fairly difficult, but this can be the hardest part of the whole process, honestly. But if you want to make it a little easier on yourself, you can make sure you buy beads with large openings. It just means that you'll have to tie larger knots later, which isn't the end of the world, it's up to you. I just really liked the look of these brass or copper spacer beads. So I kind of try to twist it so they go in easier. And once you have that threaded, go ahead and tie that string in a knot so it holds that bead in place, because if you have it sliding all over, it might get caught in your book. And we want that bookmark nice and flat. And I always double knot mine. That's just because that's the amount of knots I need to make sure that my bead can't move over it. The wider the opening on the bead, the more knots you'll have to do. So what I always do is I use a fork and I just pinch it between my knees, and I use that to hold my tassel. And you can use any kind of braid you want. I like to use 2 strands for this bookmark part. So I do what's called a rope braid, where you twist in one direction and then wrap them around each other in the opposite direction. You can use any braid you want. If you want a regular 3-stranded braid, you can always add another strand at that knot right behind the bead, or in the very beginning, it's up to you. And yeah, just do whatever you think looks nice. So when you've reached a good length, depends on what you're going to be using it for, just make sure you knot it before you continue. Just knot it once for now. If you're happy with your result, you go ahead and knot it again and have a double knot. And that's because next we're going to be putting the end beads on. I always like to have 2 on the end, just because it gives it a little extra weight. If you want to add more or less, that's up to you. Go ahead and add some knots in between each bead. So before you put on the second one, make sure you knot it again. Again, this is not a necessary thing, it's just a thing I like to do because I like the look of it. And when you're done, go ahead and make sure your knot is nice and large so your beads won't go anywhere, and snip it off. And you're done. Congratulations! And if you want, at the very end, you can just go ahead and give it a final trim, make sure that's all nice. I like my ends really even. And there you go. Happy reading!